Okay, so get this. We're diving into the history of Christianity in Ethiopia. But it's not your typical missionary story.
Oh,
Imagine religion spreading not from the ground up, but from the top down.
from the top down.
Yeah, starting with the king himself.
Wow. That's pretty different.
We've got a mix of historical accounts and analysis here, and our mission, if you will,
Okay.
is to uncover how this royal embrace of Christianity shaped Ethiopia,
I see.
from its art and architecture to its relationship with the Coptic Church in Egypt. Get ready for some aha moments.
Sounds fascinating.
So let's rewind the clock back to the 4th century to the powerful kingdom of Aksum.
Okay.
In ancient Ethiopia, enter Frumentius, the figure credited with converting King Ezana to Christianity.
And King Ezana didn't just convert, he went all in, even taking the baptismal name Abraha.
Right. It wasn't just a personal conversion either. Ezana's decision had a huge ripple effect throughout the kingdom.
It did, and we see this reflected in his trilingual inscription where he declares his faith. In the faith of God and the power of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Wow.
It's a powerful statement, and it's backed up by more tangible evidence, too. Later in his reign, the cross even starts appearing on coins.
That's pretty significant.
Talk about making a statement. This royal seal of approval helped Christianity spread rapidly.
That's a far cry from missionaries slowly converting individuals one by one. What impact do you think this had on Ethiopian Christianity?
Well, it's certainly unique. It raises some questions about the depth of understanding amongst the population. Did the speed of conversion lead to a shallower understanding of the faith, or did the royal endorsement create a sense of unity and shared identity?
Good point. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's get back to Frumentius. He doesn't just convert the king and call it a day.
Right.
He takes a trip to Alexandria, the center of the Coptic Orthodox Church. What was the purpose of this journey?
He was seeking a bishop for the growing Ethiopian Christian community. It's a logical step.
Right.
As the number of Christians grew, they needed spiritual leadership and guidance.
Makes sense. But here's where things take a turn. Guess who ends up being appointed as the first bishop of Ethiopia?
I don't know who.
Frumentius himself.
Wow. It's a twist of fate that had a long-lasting impact on the Ethiopian Church and its relationship with the Coptic Orthodox Church.
Okay, so now we have an Ethiopian king converted to Christianity, but the head of the Ethiopian Church is appointed from Alexandria. How did this dynamic play out?
Well, the Ethiopian Church, originating from a king's conversion, fell under the jurisdiction of the Coptic Church in Alexandria. And this wasn't just a temporary thing. There was a rule, the 42nd pseudo-canon of the Council of Nicaea.
A pseudo-canon.
It essentially barred Ethiopians from becoming the head of their own church.
Wow, really?
This rule remained in effect all the way until 1959.
Wow, 1959. That is incredibly recent. So for centuries, the Ethiopian Church was led by someone appointed from outside. What implications did this have on the development of Ethiopian Christianity?
Well, it's complex, but on the one hand, it fostered a close relationship between the Ethiopian and Coptic churches. They had a shared theological tradition, and the Coptic Church provided support and guidance to the Ethiopian Church.
But on the other hand, it also meant that the Ethiopian Church lacked a certain level of autonomy.
Yes, and that raises some questions. Did it create tension or resentment over time? How did it impact how Ethiopians viewed their own religious identity?
It's definitely something worth exploring further.
We will, but before we get to the long-term impacts, we need to introduce another key player, the Nine Saints.
The Nine Saints.
These individuals played a crucial role in spreading Christianity beyond the royal court, bringing it into the hearts and minds of the Ethiopian people. Now, these Nine Saints weren't actually Ethiopian,
Oh, really? Where were they from?
They had fled religious persecution from other parts of the Eastern Roman Empire seeking refuge. So imagine arriving in Ethiopia with its own distinct culture and traditions, then trying to share your faith. Must have been daunting.
I can only imagine. It speaks volumes about their dedication. They weren't deterred at all. They embraced the challenge.
And they knew to truly connect. They needed more than just, sermons.
Yeah.
They dedicated themselves to learning Ge'ez,
Right.
the local language, immersed themselves in the culture, a sign of respect, showing they weren't there to impose their beliefs, but to share them in a way that resonated.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's a more nuanced understanding of conversion than just preaching and baptizing. It's about cultural exchange, adaptation.
Yeah.
So how did their approach differ from, say, a traditional missionary?
Well, for one, they embraced the power of monasticism.
Okay.
They established monastic communities, which quickly became centers of learning and spiritual practice. But these communities weren't isolated.
Right.
They were deeply intertwined with the lives of the people.
So it wasn't just about individual conversions, but creating these spaces where Christianity could flourish within the community.
Exactly. They went even further. They understood that for Christianity to truly resonate, it needed to speak the language of the people.
Okay.
So they translated the Bible into Giyas, making the scriptures accessible to Ethiopians in their own tongue.
That's huge. I'm trying to imagine the impact of finally having the Bible in your own language.
Yeah.
Those stories and teachings might have felt distant or foreign before, but suddenly become personal and powerful.
Exactly. The Nine Saints weren't just preaching a foreign faith, they were weaving it into the fabric of Ethiopian society, respecting the existing traditions while introducing new ideas. And their names, by the way, were Abba Aragawi, also known as Z. Michael, Abba Penelawan, Abba Jerima or Isak or Yishak, Abba Aftse, Abba Guba, Abba Aleph, Abba Yamata, Abba Likanos, and Abba Sema.
It's amazing we've got King Izana's influence, the role of the Coptic Church, and now these nine saints. I feel like we're getting a complex and fascinating picture of how Christianity took root in Ethiopia.
And it wasn't just about rituals and beliefs. The Nine Saints impacted art and architecture as well. Some scholars even believe that those ruins of ancient basilicas, in cities like Aksum, Adulis, and Haltai, they might have Syriac influences, suggesting connections to churches in the Eastern Mediterranean.
So their legacy can be seen not just in the beliefs and practices, but in the physical landscape of the country.
Speaking of which, we can't overlook Debri Damo.
Debri Damo.
Imagine a monastery perched atop a flat-topped mountain.
Wow.
Dating back to the 6th century. It's a testament to the enduring influence of these early monastic communities.
A monastery on a mountaintop. It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel. What's the significance of Debri Damo in Ethiopian Christianity?
Well, it's the oldest surviving Christian structure in Ethiopia.
Really?
And it symbolizes the deep connection between faith and the natural world that we see in Ethiopian Christianity. Building a monastery in such a remote, challenging location speaks volumes about the dedication of those early Christians.
I'm starting to get a sense of how it all fits together. The king's conversion paved the way, the Coptic Church provided guidance and structure, and the nine saints spread the faith, creating lasting institutions and leaving their mark on the land itself. Remarkable story. But what about the power dynamics within the Ethiopian Church itself? How did all this history shape the way the church was governed?
That's a great question. Remember how the Ethiopian Church fell under the jurisdiction of the Coptic Church in Alexandria?
Yeah.
That arrangement led to a very particular leadership structure.
A dual leadership structure. How did that work?
So you had the Coptic Abuna, appointed from Egypt, oversaw ordinations, theological matters. Think of it as ensuring doctrinal purity, maintaining the connection with the Coptic Church.
So who handled the day-to-day affairs?
That's where the edge came in.
Yehush.
The abbot of the monastery of Debre Libanos in Shewa managed the church's properties, administrative affairs. It was a fascinating system, spiritual authority coming from outside, internal administration remaining in Ethiopian hands.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act, especially with the distance between Ethiopia and Alexandria. Were there any challenges or tensions that came up because of this dual leadership?
Of course. Imagine, for example, what happened when communication with the Coptic Church was disrupted. Like during the 10th and 11th centuries, no bishop was sent from Egypt for a long period.
Oh, wow.
No ordinations. Theological guidance unavailable.
So how did they manage without the Abuna for that long?
Well, it highlights the importance of the Achej. They had to step up, fill the void, ensure the church continued to function.
Sounds like this situation could have led to some tension, maybe a desire for more autonomy. Did this experience have a lasting impact on the relationship between the two churches?
Well, it certainly solidified the role of the Achej, and you could argue it planted the seeds for the eventual push for full independence. Remember that 42nd pseudo-canon?
Yeah.
Preventing Ethiopians from leading their own church. Well, that rule was finally overturned in 1959. Abba Basilios became the first Ethiopian-born patriarch. And that brings us to another interesting point. The patriarch's title itself reflects this historical division.
Really? How so?
The patriarch's full title, Archbishop of Aksum and Etche of the See of St. Tekel Haymanot. It encompasses both the spiritual authority traditionally held by the Coptic Abuna and the administrative role of the Achej.
It's like the title itself tells the story
Yeah.
of the Ethiopian Church's journey toward independence.
Rasa. Fascinating. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you said earlier about the rapid top-down conversion maybe leading to a shallower understanding. Do you think that's a valid concern? How did the work of the Nine Saints address that?
That's a great question, and something historians still debate. When a king converts and decrees a new religion, there's always a risk the conversion won't be deeply rooted.
So how do we reconcile that with Ethiopian Christianity taking hold so strongly? Well, that's where the Nine Saints come in. By immersing themselves, learning the language, establishing communities, they created a space where Christianity could be understood on a deeper level.
Okay, yeah.
They weren't just imposing rules, they were fostering a genuine engagement.
Yeah, they acted as a bridge between that top-down decree and the experience of the people, helping to ground the faith in a way that resonated personally.
Exactly. Their efforts were crucial in shaping Ethiopian Christianity into a truly unique and enduring faith.
We've covered a lot, from King Ezana's conversion, the Nine Saints, the dual leadership. Ethiopian Christianity really has a story unlike any other. But we can't ignore the elephant in the room. What about the religious beliefs and practices that existed in Ethiopia before Christianity?
Ah, yes, that's a crucial piece. Important to remember, Ethiopia wasn't a blank slate before Christianity. It had its own rich religious landscape.
So what can you tell us about pre-Christian Ethiopia? What did people believe in? What were their practices?
Well, unfortunately, the sources, they mainly focus on the rise of Christianity. Details about those earlier beliefs are a bit scarce.
That's too bad, but I guess that's often the case with history. The dominant narrative kind of overshadows what came before. But, I mean, based on what we know from other ancient cultures, it's probably safe to assume that there were all sorts of, well, indigenous beliefs and practices. So what kind of things might have been a part of that pre-Christian landscape?
Well, it's very likely, polytheistic beliefs, animism, ancestor worship, those were probably pretty prevalent.
Okay.
I mean, when you think about Ethiopia's diverse landscape, towering mountains, vast plains, fertile valleys,
Right.
it makes sense that people found spiritual significance in the natural world.
Yeah, absolutely. We see that in so many cultures,
Yeah.
those kinds of connections between, nature and spirituality. So then how did Christianity, with its emphasis on one God, interact with these existing beliefs? Was it a clash of civilizations, or was there some blending, or
That's where it gets really interesting. There was likely a process of what we call syncretism,
syncretism?
where elements of those traditional beliefs are absorbed into Christian practices.
Oh, I love that word, syncretism.
Ah.
It's like a cultural fusion, right?
Hmm.
What are some specific examples of this in Ethiopian Christianity?
Well, think about the veneration of saints,
Okay.
a central part of Ethiopian Christianity. It's possible that it was influenced by pre-Christian ancestor worship.
Oh, interesting.
That reverence for certain figures, the belief in their power to intercede, those could be echoes of those earlier traditions.
It's like a bridge between the old and the new, a way for people to connect with their existing beliefs, but while embracing this new faith. Do you think this syncretism played a role in the widespread acceptance of Christianity?
Absolutely. I mean, if Christianity had been presented as just a complete rejection,
Yeah.
it might have faced a lot more resistance, but incorporating elements of familiar practices made it feel less like an imposition, more like an evolution of existing traditions.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It reminds me of how, Christianity itself incorporated elements of, Roman paganism
Yeah.
as it spread through the Roman Empire. It's a reminder that cultural exchange is rarely a one-way street.
Exactly. And this is precisely why it's so important to really dig deeper, explore the context of, any religion or practice.
Yeah.
There's always more to the story.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of unpacking this really unique, often overlooked chapter in Christian history, from royal conversions to mountaintop monasteries to the Coptic Church's influence to the legacy of the Nine Saints. We've seen how Ethiopian Christianity really took shape.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most important thing for our listeners to take away from this?
For me, the key takeaway is that the spread of religion, it's rarely simple or straightforward.
Right.
It can be messy, it's often political, it's always shaped by the culture in which it takes root.
Yeah. We can't just look at traditions in isolation.
Right.
We have to understand the historical forces that shape them.
And the story of Ethiopian Christianity, it highlights the power of human agency. Yes, there were kings, bishops, they made decisions.
Right.
But there were also individuals, like the Nine Saints, who worked so hard to adapt Christianity to make it meaningful, accessible to people. Their efforts had a lasting impact. They shaped a tradition that's still thriving today.
I think that's a great note to end on. So, listeners, the next time you encounter a religious tradition that seems different or unfamiliar, just remember that behind it is a complex and fascinating history waiting to be explored. You just might be surprised by what you discover. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.